Okay, imagine this simple experiment. I place a stick in the ground here when the sun's as high as it's going to get. At the same time, a friend 800 miles north in Seattle also puts a stick of the same length in the ground. I'll measure the length of the shadow from my stick and ask my friend for the length of the shadow of hers. They won't be the same length if the Earth is round. There are more complicated ways to establish the shape of the Earth, but this experiment is accessible to everyone, yet some people dispute the results. They insist that Earth's shape is not that of a basketball, but rather more like a frisbee, and their ideas are catching on. I'm Seth Shostak.
I'm Molly Bentley. Welcome to Big Picture Science, produced at the Seti Institute, where researchers investigate the nature and origin of life. On Big Picture Science, we give you the wide-angle view on science and technology and devote one episode a month to critical thinking, skeptic check. For centuries, the scientific method has been the path not only to knowledge but to power. Those who could measure the circumference of the Earth, determine the orbit of the planets around the sun, electrons around a nucleus, or use high-tech tools to decode the human genome have had extraordinary access to knowledge. Scientists have a deciding vote in determining what we accept as true, but the rise in the number of people who reject these truths suggests a backlash to this process. In this episode, the growing flat Earth movement, who decides scientific truth, and investigating extraordinary claims using approaches that feel like science but aren't. It's Skeptic Check Flat Earth.
When it comes to well-established cosmic facts, a round Earth is on solid and spherical ground. The ancient Greeks, who liked to study eclipses and invented geometry, determined our planet's shape pretty quickly. But hey, why take 2,200 years of careful observation at face value?
I'm Jim Underdown, Executive Director of the Center for Inquiry in Los Angeles and of the Independent Investigations Group, and we are on our way to the Salton Sea to see if the Earth is actually round.
Knowing Jim for as long as we have means hearing him reiterate his personal motto that time is your most valuable commodity. Use it wisely. So why then would our time-conscious colleague drive 3 hours into the hot California desert to test an idea that doesn't need testing and that can be settled with a 2-second image search?
Well, here's a clue.
My name is Alex Moshakis, and I attended the first Flat Earth convention in the UK.
Reporter Alex Moshakis has learned firsthand that what's old is new again, which will eventually bring us back to Jim's Salton Sea experiment. The retro idea that's back in vogue? Our understanding of the shape of the Earth prior to the Greeks. Yes, the flat earthers have gone all pre-Eratosthenes on us, questioning our more than 2 millennia-long understanding of the planet's roundness.
The group rejects verifiable scientific evidence that apparently has tricked teachers into outfitting their classrooms with models of the Earth shaped like grapefruits instead of omelets. Now, it may be natural to dismiss the movement as off the rails, but its roots suggest a deep discomfort with the established idea of who has the authority to determine truth.
With group names like the Infinite Plane Society, ideas about a flat Earth have spread wildly, mainly over the internet on YouTube, and are given a public boost by celebrities. The YouTube videos have millions of hits, which means at least a growing curiosity about the movement.
But the online community is now going offline to meet in person. The first ever Flat Earth conference held in the U.S. in the fall of 2017 was followed up a few months later by the first meeting of Flat Earthers in the UK. Journalist Alex Moshakis wrote about the Birmingham conference for The Guardian.
We reached him by Skype. Fittingly enough, in the land where some of the first measurements of the shadow of the Earth during a lunar eclipse took place, Greece.
All right, Alex, you attended this convention. Describe the feeling of walking into this room. How many people, what the energy was like? What was it like to attend this conference?
The actual convention was not unlike a lot of other conventions that I'd been to. I mean, it was in a few rooms in a central Birmingham hotel. Seats in rows, a small stage at the end. And if you'd walked past and not known what was going on, it would have kind of looked very normal. And it was only when I walked into the room and heard some of the conversations going on, that you really kind of realize that something different maybe was being believed by these people.
So that we're clear on this, they do not believe, at least the majority of them, some of them are still figuring it out, but they do not believe that the Earth is a globe. What shape do they believe that the Earth is?
Correct. I think most people are still working it out. So the universal theory is that it's definitely not a globe, but people have very different views on what exact shape it is. So some people, I think the general view is that the Earth is pancake shaped, and the Arctic is right in the middle, and the Antarctic surrounds the Earth at its edges, and it's this big wall of ice. But others at the convention were presenting other hypotheses. One speaker suggested that the Earth was diamond-shaped and supported by huge columns, and that if you walked off one edge, you'd appear on the other side like a game of Pac-Man. So people are yet to agree on a one single idea, and I think a lot of people are trying to get their own theories into the limelight as much as possible.
And if you were to walk off this pancake-shaped Earth, you'd still end up on the other side of it, or would you fall off the edge of the Earth?
So in that theory, you definitely would drop off the edge, but because there's such a high wall of ice, you're not going to be able to get past that. And a few people at the convention actually said to me as well that NASA and other government agencies are actually monitoring that wall of ice anyway. So if you made it up to the top, you'd be sent packing immediately. They'd find you.
Now, according to them, is the Earth moving in space? Is it in orbit around the sun?
No, so it's definitely not moving in space. It's rooted somehow, and the Earth in these beliefs is very much the center of the universe. So the sun, the moon, it's rotating around our plane. And that's quite crucial to many beliefs, that we are very much the center of the universe.
Do the flat earthers accept that the moon is round, or that the other planets in our solar system are round or roundish?
Yeah, it depends on the belief. Some people very much think that the moon is round, and yet believe that our Earth is flat.
Putting aside the centuries of science and the expeditions that circumnavigated the globe, how do they, the flat earth believers, how do they interpret the photos of Earth from space and evidence with our own eyes, such as the shadow of the Earth across the moon during an eclipse? What do they make of that?
So in the eyes of flat earthers, it's all faked. And who it's faked by causes some arguments. Most people believe that NASA is completely fabricated as an agency, and that every document that NASA puts out into the world has been fabricated and is fake. So every image that NASA has put out is photoshopped, according to flat earthers, and nothing can be trusted. A lot of people think that we've never been into space, and in fact some flat earthers believe that space doesn't actually exist. And the more you ask flat earthers about this evidence, the more you bring it up, the more they'll say, look, this is a piece of evidence that has been planted by a government agency or an elite that is trying to make us believe that the Earth is a globe.
Now, a woman that you spoke with said, or at least you heard her say this, if they lied about this, if they lied, they being the elite, NASA, the government officials lied about the shape of the Earth, what else are they lying about? And the idea is that the notion that the Earth is round is just one lie that officials are putting forth, but there are many other conspiracies. And what are the other conspiracies that they believe that this is entangled with?
Yeah, correct. So what I found was that if people are believing or subscribing to the flat earth movement, and then they're often subscribing to other conspiracy theory movements. So someone who believes the Earth is flat will believe that the moon landings were faked. All kinds of conspiracy theories. A lot of people who believe in flat earth, for example, are anti-vaxxers and will prevent children from being given vaccinations that are very important, and will dismiss conventional medicine. And that's where it gets a bit dangerous.
When you ask the question of why these conspiracies exist and why anyone would go to these lengths to create false evidence like this, photoshopped images of the Earth, for example, you couldn't get a satisfactory answer. No one could explain to you why these conspiracies exist.
No. One person did say that he considered it cheaper to fabricate evidence of there being a moon landing than it would be to actually fund a government mission to the moon, for example. But no one else could really explain why this would all take place.
Now, did you find yourself, Alex, wanting to argue and throw more and more examples of the Earth being round at these believers, or did you find yourself able to be open and listen to what they have to say? It must have been quite surreal.
It is surreal. But it was really, I mean, I was there with an open mind, basically, and I was very much listening to what people were saying, and it was very, very interesting to hear. What I have to stress is that everybody there was absolutely lovely. There was a warmth at this convention. There was a real sense of community there. And so it was difficult to kind of take this position of antagonist and question people over and over again, because they were just so genuinely nice.
Many of these members of the Flat Earth movement only have known each other online. And you say that this was a chance for them all to come together and meet each other and in person. There were lectures, there were workshops at this convention. What were the presentations like, and did it have the trappings of scientific argument?
The talks were really interesting. I mean, for me, watching them, they were completely baffling. I spoke to a couple of speakers after they spoke, and they said, well, they would perhaps pitch their talks at flat earthers who were already very much aware of the movement and who had committed hundreds of hours to research. But still, to me, I think even if you had that foundation knowledge of the flat earth movement, they would be very difficult to understand. They weren't in many ways scientific, although they did borrow a language of science and definitely a visual element of scientific presentations that gave them the appearance of being legitimate. But when you kind of listen very carefully, as a lot of people were doing, you could see through the cracks fairly easily.
One of the most fascinating elements of the article that you wrote for The Guardian was when people described to you the moment when they had an epiphany about what was really true. And many of the people had science at school, and at some point they rejected it. They had this moment and they decided to embrace other ideas. And it sounds as though you were able to pinpoint a theme as to when that epiphany came and the flat earth idea was embraced along with a number of other conspiratorial ideas. And what was that moment for many of these people?
Yeah, flat earthers call it an awakening. And it's when they've been down the rabbit hole of the YouTube algorithm and discovered that the earth is flat, and which has led on to other conspiracy theories. The people I talked to, and I spoke to 20, 30 people at the convention, so not too many people, but a sizable number who were there. A lot of people in conversation told me of a kind of personal crisis that they'd been through that had led to them coming to believe in this conspiracy theory. Now, this is not scientific in any way, but people mentioned the breakdown of a marriage or the breakdown of a relationship or some other kind of personal crisis that left them kind of open to listening to views that they perhaps would have rejected.
Well, finally, Alex, I wonder if there's any piece of evidence that you think would convince the flat earth believers that they're wrong or that the earth is indeed round. And in a moment, we're going to hear of an experiment that a gentleman and his team are doing at the Salton Sea to demonstrate that the earth is round. But I'm getting the sense from what you said that no matter what his results are, the people that you met aren't going to buy it.
No, I don't think they will. I genuinely believe that there'll be no evidence that will convince them that the earth is a globe. An interesting point here is I spoke to one of the speakers and I said, what happens if you receive proof that the earth is a globe? He said, I'm not worried about that. What I'm more worried about is that I receive proof that the earth is flat, because then what am I going to do?
Alex Mouschakas is a reporter. He writes for The Observer, The Guardian, and Esquire, and his article about the Flat Earth Convention in the UK appeared in The Observer. Alex Mouschakas, thank you so much for speaking to us about this.
Thank you, guys. My pleasure.
Harry Dyer, a lecturer in education at the University of East Anglia, also attended the Flat Earth Convention and wrote about it, providing insight into what might be driving the movement.
When you talk to them, when you hear them speak, they're very engaged with science. They're very engaged with the ideas of exploring the world. They just come at it through a different lens, quite a radical lens. They spent a lot of the weekend planning their scientific experiments they want to do to go and, work out which version of the flat earth is correct. If it's just an earth that's floating in the middle of nowhere, or if it has a dome, or if it's inside of an egg, or if there's something underneath and on top. They do seem to love science. What they don't love is scientists. They seem to distrust scientists.
So it sounds like it's kind of a referendum on science and knowledge, maybe growing out of a frustration that scientists seem to have a monopoly on the last word when it comes to the truth about how nature works?
I think so. Something that was said throughout the convention was that scientists aren't doing a great job of explaining themselves and communicating with the general public. They seem to want to, like you say, a referendum to separate science from scientists, to separate knowledge and power, to suggest that the old power structures that have kept a grasp on what we think is real and isn't real for so long need to be challenged. On the Sunday night, for example, there was a debate between 3 physics PhD students and 4 flat earthers, where there was this friendly and quite jovial backwards and forwards between them all. But the flat earthers aren't quite on par with their use of science to scientists. They do seem also very resistant to knowledge. When there was a debate with the PhD physicists, the physicists very diligently answered all their questions about, how the world would work in a globe Earth model. And they just rejected that because it didn't fit their model. So they're not very open to hearing alternative ideas.
So it's the authority of the scientists that they're rebelling against. At least it sounds that way. Obviously, they're not the first in the history of humankind to rebel against authority. Not so long ago, all authority resided with the theologians, right, with religion. They knew what the facts of the world were, and, that was unchallengeable. But today it seems to be the scientists. So these people sound like, heretics of 500 years ago.
Right. And in many ways, that's how they see themselves as pushing the conversation forward away from actually maybe back towards religious beliefs. A lot of the weekend was spent talking about the 4 pillars of the earth and talking about Bible readings. And it was undertones of religion there the entire time. And it did seem to be in a way that we moved away from church and secular beliefs. We seem to be moving more towards science. And I think with the internet and with these sorts of meetings, maybe we're moving back towards different belief structures. I have a hard time explaining this and parsing exactly where we are going as a society and, just how much flat earthers can tell us about the world. But I do think it suggests that we're moving away from a trust in science. In the UK, around the Brexit vote, we had a lot of talk around being fed up of experts and experts who were talking about the economy and the future of the EU, and it became a discussion around emotions and around feelings and around gut beliefs into what was best for the EU. And I know in the American election, a lot of it was around emotion as well. It seems to be the flat earthers are touching into this populism, this rise towards emotions and try and understand and make sense of the world that they live in, and less of a trust in science itself.
Harry Dyer, thanks very much for talking with us.
Not at all. Thank you.
Harry Dyer is a lecturer in education at the University of East Anglia. You can find a link to his online article, I Watched an Entire Flat Earth Convention for My Research. Here's What I Learned, on our website, bigpicturescience.org.
Up next, how science knows what it knows about the shape of the Earth and Jim's experiment in the California desert. Plus, a biologist runs DNA tests on a certain Scottish lake to see what lives there.
It's our monthly look at critical thinking on Big Picture Science. Skeptic Check, Flat Earth.
I've learned recently that I am what some members of the Flat Earth movement call a globe earther. That is, I believe that the planet is a sphere. I wonder if what's helping feed the enthusiasm for Flat Earth ideas is the fact that the Earth's roundness was established so long ago. I mean, we've forgotten why we've known that we live on a globe and not a disk, which gives us an excuse to indulge in one of my favorite elements of Pi Pi Psi, traveling back to ancient Greece. I love talking about these guys because they transformed our understanding of Earth without any fancy equipment. They used the geometry, which they had invented, and deductive reasoning. They also have good food.
In 240 BC, around the time that Archimedes was showing off his insight about the relationship of a circle's circumference to its diameter,
I've got it. I'm the first to calculate pi. Want to hear me recite it? No, we trust you, Archimedes. You're super smart. 3.1415.
During that time, the Greek mathematician and geographer Eratosthenes became the first to measure the Earth's circumference, at least as far as we know. He did this by comparing the length of the shadows thrown by a stick in Egypt and a stick of the same length in Greece.
At noon during the solstice, the Egyptian stick cast no shadow, but the stick in Greece did. So by using the length of that shadow and some simple geometry, he could calculate Earth's circumference. And he got the answer right to within 5%. When in the 1500s, Magellan's ships circumnavigated the globe, you can be sure they didn't expect to sail off and over the edge. It had long been established that the Earth was round.
Well, he's not in Greece, but he's still doing what the Greeks might do if they were in the California desert at the Salton Sea. Jim Underdown, the executive director of the Center for Inquiry in Los Angeles, is planning a public demonstration of another way we know that the Earth is round.
In the summer of 2018, he will travel west from L.A. with a telescope, a helium-filled balloon, and a National Geographic Explorer camera crew to film the answer to a question.
If you're on one side of a lake and it's 10 miles long, or the Salton Sea is 10 miles across, how high would a balloon on the other side have to be before you could actually start seeing it?
The idea is simple. If the Earth were flat, he could see the balloon even if it were only a foot off the ground. Sure, at 10 miles away it would look small, but that's what the telescope is for. But if the Earth is round, well, at 10 miles, the landscape will have curved down enough to hide the balloon until it gains some real altitude.
His team chose the Salton Sea because there aren't a lot of people or traffic, and the clear air provides good visibility. But still, doesn't it feel a little been there, done that to determine the shape of the Earth?
I'll tell you, I mean, we were so close to not doing this because, yes, of course the Earth is round. We're not going to see if the Earth is round. We're demonstrating in a couple of different ways that it's round and showing some different ways that anyone can see the curvature of the Earth without being 40,000 feet up in the air in an airplane or being in the space shuttle or something like that.
All right, so then let me get this straight, what you're planning to do. I mean, when people ask you, all right, you're going to the Salton Sea, but how's that going to prove the Earth is round? Maybe you could describe that. I mean, what's the actual demonstration going to be?
Well, part of the premise of many of the flat earthers is that they believe that water is flat. Well, water is always flat. So theoretically, you should be able to stand on one side of the Salton Sea, and if you had a powerful enough telescope, you should be able to see somebody standing at the other side of the Salton Sea 10 miles across, or in the spot we're going to be 9.6 miles across. So what we're going to do is point this telescope across, and you're not going to be able to see anyone over there. And on the other side, some people with a giant target that we are going to raise up in the air with the help of some helium is going to start floating up in the air, and we're going to wait till you can actually see that from the first side, but they're not going to be able to see it until it's about 34 feet up in the air. And that's going to be a very visual and obvious demonstration that the Earth is in fact curved. I mean, I was out there a couple of months ago doing a exploratory, just a scouting mission, and just to look through a telescope and see some of the water in focus and then it just sort of drops off is not something that you think about or see very often. So just to sort of get a good look at the curvature of the Earth in different ways up close in these conditions, I hope will strike them as being important evidence.
Is there anything that could go wrong with this demo?
Yeah, there's a few things that could go wrong. Thanks for asking in case it blows up in my face. The two big things that couldn't go wrong are if it's windy or dusty out there and the conditions of the air and the atmosphere are bad just for seeing long distances. That'll be a big problem. Plus, it'll be hard to float our balloon up in the air if it's too windy. The other thing that can happen is occasionally a temperature inversion can happen where two layers of air actually help promote a mirage type of a situation, and it actually may bend the light around the curve of the Earth. So we're hoping that by getting there at the crack of dawn on Sunday morning, that the conditions will be okay. There won't be much wind, and that the air will all sort of be the same temperature, and we won't have to worry about this weird, freakish mirage situation.
Jim, I know that you're familiar with many of these challenges to modern science or even modern accomplishment. For example, the 10 or 15% of the public that thinks we never went to the moon. But they will often bring some evidence to that argument. They'll say, well, now, wait a minute. There are no shadows, or there are multiple shadows, or whatever. They'll look at the moon photos, or, they have some argument which you can't dismiss really out of hand. You need to know what's going on to explain. Do the flat earthers bring any sort of reasonable argument to their point of view?
Well, some of these atmospheric conditions raise questions in people's minds. A mirage is a real thing, and that's a weird situation. And sometimes you can see great distances where you shouldn't be able to see, like another shore. There was a situation up in Lake Ontario where people on the New York side could see parts of the city of Toronto that they shouldn't have been able to see because of a temperature inversion. So, when people get hold of that, a lot of people will say, aha, they are lying to us. And how come I can see all the way to Toronto when your numbers with the curvature of the Earth say that isn't possible? So certain things like that are actual physical properties that we have to be aware of.
Well, finally, Jim, are you going to publish these results in some refereed scientific journal?
Well, I think it'll probably end up in Skeptical Inquirer magazine, and it'll end up on the Independent Investigations Group website and probably one of the CFI websites. And then, National Geographic. Look, this is all assuming it all goes well. If it doesn't go well, I'll be moving to Borneo or something.
Jim Underdown, thank you very much for speaking with us, and good luck.
Thanks for having me on, Seth.
Jim Underdown is the executive director of the Center for Inquiry in Los Angeles and of the Independent Investigations Group.
Really, this is so gosh darn simple. Consider, if the Earth were flat, you could see the Empire State Building from 50 miles away in New Jersey, but you can't.
You can find a link to where Jim will post the results of his experiment at our website, bigpicturescience.org. Well, here are a couple other quick experiments you can do to verify that our globe is truly global in shape. Go down to the beach with binoculars and watch a ship sail out to sea. When the ship gets about 3 miles away, you'll see the top of the craft, but not the bottom. And a few minutes later, you'll only see the funnels. The ship has disappeared because of the curvature of the Earth. Ambitious types could construct a rocket, as rapper B.O.B., a flat Earth believer, plans to do, and look at Earth from high altitude. And if you do this, by the way, send us an email and tell us what you see.